In an age of AI and supercomputers, space travel, and unbelievable medical technology, I might sound like a Luddite for saying this, but I still think that books are humanity's greatest invention. And I also think that the further we stray from books as a society, the worse things are going to get. And let's be honest, things don't seem to be going in a great direction at the moment. Before I go any further, I am talking specifically about physical books. Now, if you're a fan of ebooks and audiobooks, stick with me and I'll make my case for why. First, let's take a look at some of the technologies that people consider the greatest in human history, starting with the automobile. Cars have become an iconic symbol of freedom, mobility, wealth, status, and even part of the American dream. But all of that has come at a very steep cost. In 2023, over 40,000 Americans died in automobile accidents. Now, this has been trending downwards since its all-time high in the 70s, which was over 50,000 people a year. And most of this improvement has been from safety regulations and safety technologies being put into automobiles. But that's still a staggering amount of people. And that doesn't even take into consideration non-fatal accidents where people might sustain life-altering injuries and also have lifelong expenses because of those injuries. Then there's the obvious concerns about pollution, and I'm not just talking about exhaust fumes and greenhouse gases, but there's normal wear items on cars like brakes and tires, batteries need to be replaced, and all of this stuff usually just ends up in landfills where it leaks out into the earth. And lastly, there's the issue of congestion and infrastructure. Where I live, it would be very difficult to not have a car. Everything's very far apart. We don't really have much public transportation. But even in major cities where there is great public transportation infrastructure, cities are often still designed to at least accommodate cars. They're over congested, it makes them less walkable, and it decreases the efficiency of those public transportation services. While you could make the case that the automobile is a net positive for humanity, I think you have to do a lot of calculus to get there, so I think that alone disqualifies it from the discussion of the greatest invention of all time. Now let's take a look at another revolutionary technology, and it's the one I'm using to talk to you right now. It's the internet. And if you're like me, you're old enough to remember when the internet first got started with those AOL 20 hours free discs and setting up an instant messenger account or a live journal or MySpace. Very embarrassing. But it was such a fun time of exploration and creativity. But in just about 30 years of this technology being widely available, we've seen it being weaponized to quickly spread misinformation, to scam people out of money, to polarize and radicalize people. So it certainly has its drawbacks, to say the least. And it also has some environmental concerns. The internet is basically hosted on servers in these giant data centers. They use a ton of natural resources and they just take up a lot of physical space. They can be millions of square feet in size, which equates to acres upon acres. And this really blew my mind when I looked it up. Large data centers can use upwards of 5 million gallons of water per day to cool the computers. That really shocked me. Just like the automobile, the internet seems to have almost as many, if not more, downsides than it does benefits. So let's talk about books, specifically physical books. Now, for the sake of being intellectually honest, we have to acknowledge that physical books also come with an environmental impact. There are about 2 billion physical books printed every single year, which equates to about 30 million trees, and I guess that's about the size of a forest that would take up the space of Washington, D.C. So clearly physical books aren't without their own environmental problems. But I think there's two main differences between books and some of these other technologies. First is, once a book is produced, that's really where its energy expenditure and tax on the environment comes to an end. Obviously, with a car, you have to continue to maintain it. You have to continue to put gas in it. Even if you have an electric vehicle, the charging from that EV probably comes from a power plant that burns fossil fuel. And even if you're using only solar or wind energy to charge your EV, you still have all those other wear and tear items like brakes and tires. You're still contributing to roadkill. You're still taking up space on the highway. When it comes to e-readers or devices that play audiobooks, obviously their energy expenditure is much lower than a car, but it's not nothing. And a lot of these devices will fail after a few years and become e-waste. If you're not familiar with what e-waste is, I would really encourage you to look into it. There are some documentaries. I would also recommend the book Digital Rubbish by Jennifer Gabrus. That book came out in 2011, and the problem has only become way worse since then. A well-kept book is definitely going to outlast an e-reader and an automobile. I mean, there's books that are well-kept that are hundreds of years old. Most electronics are probably going to last 5, maybe 10 years. Sometimes even if they still work, the battery still holds charge, they just get phased out because of firmware changes and then they don't really work well anymore. Automobiles, obviously you can also maintain those, but if you're actually driving them, there's only so much you can do. Where I live in New England, we have a lot of salt on the roads during the winter, which is going to really eat away at your car. Even a well-maintained car that's driven daily is probably only going to last you 10 to 15 years. We can always plant more trees. As far as I know, we haven't figured out a way to make more oil or water. Okay, so we know that books don't have the same drawbacks as some of these other technologies, but do they really stack up against things like the internet or the automobile in terms of benefits? I think the answer is yes, and it's not even close. When you really think about the difference between humans and other species, the thing that separates us the most, in my opinion, is our advanced ability to communicate. And writing and reading is a huge part of that. One of the most common debates you'll see in this online reading community is this question of, do audiobooks count as reading? And I'm not here to comment on that question specifically, but one of the things that proponents of audiobooks often say is that there was a long history in humanity of passing down stories through oral storytelling, in a way saying like audiobooks have been around forever in a sense. Now, these oral traditions are a very important part of human history, but they do have one flaw. And if you ever played a game of telephone in school, you'll understand what that is. Oral tradition relied heavily on interpretation and memory. The physically written word was a huge step forward in humans' ability to communicate with each other and preserve information. You can go back and read a written text as many times as you want. You don't have to worry about remembering something. You can pass it on to somebody else and they can read it the exact words in the exact same way that you did. And the written word really accelerated humans' ability to build on top of the work done by the people who came before them. Not to mention, reading in general just offers so many amazing benefits. You can expand your vocabulary. Books help you to build empathy. You can learn a new skill. You can learn a fact about history, mathematics, science. I find reading to be very therapeutic and calming. Reading really gets your imagination going, probably more so than something like a movie, because you have to do more of the legwork on your own to imagine the world that the author is helping you to build. Books can also act like a portal or a time machine, bringing you to a place you've never been or a time period that we can never go back to. Even reading something like an old and outdated textbook is very interesting because it gives you an idea of the limitations of human knowledge at that particular moment in time. You can read somebody's journal or memoir to get an almost first-hand look of not only what they were thinking and feeling in that moment, but what the world looked like in that time period. You're probably thinking, well, ebooks and audiobooks can do all of that too, and that is true, but I think they have an Achilles heel. And this is going to sound a little dystopian, but it's something we need to consider. Because those formats are digital, they are susceptible to manipulation. Now, let's be honest, we've already seen these conversations popping up in the reading community about revising texts that were written at a time that used a language that we no longer consider acceptable. And I think the intention behind making those revisions is a good one, where we want the language and the work to be a little bit more palatable and less offensive to people's modern sensibilities. However, if we follow that thread, we can see how it would easily be used for nefarious purposes. Let's say that somebody wants to delete the mention of a particular group out of a text, and because the majority of our texts are digital in the form of ebooks or audiobooks, well, with the right skills, that could be done. But the physical copy sitting on my shelf of Catch-22 is always going to remain the same unless somebody comes into my house and starts ripping pages out of it. Which, at this point, is not out of the realm of possibilities, but I think you get what I'm saying. There's a little bit more of a physical barrier preventing that from happening. If we move to a world where the majority or all of the books are digital, well, then people wouldn't ever have to burn books. They could just delete them or edit them to say what they want. And that's the beauty of physical books. There's no battery to charge. I can still read them if my power goes out. I don't have to worry about them being hacked. It's a piece of history that I can take with me wherever I go. And I don't think it's a coincidence that as reading is becoming less and less popular, we're watching in real time people's communication skills decrease, and simultaneously watching the problems of the world seem to get bigger and bigger. I mean, we're regressing in our language to the point where people are heavily relying on basic symbols, aka emojis, which have their place, but they don't necessarily provide a nuanced way to communicate. There's clearly a severe lack of critical thinking in online discourse. Media literacy seems to be non-existent. And of course, we have, at this point, literally violent political divide. It might seem corny, but it's been said that reading is an act of resistance, and I really think that's true. And in this chaotic time where there's so much going on and it seems like no one's really sure of where to turn or what to do, I encourage you to stick with the basics. Keep reading, keep talking about reading, and encourage others to read too. One of the ways you can do that is by sharing this video with your friends and family. It'll help me out, and hopefully it'll encourage people to pick up a book. Thanks for watching.